So far, we've focused on income when thinking about economic inequality. But what about wealth? Okay, be honest with me now. You're looking at this fellow, and do you know who he is? I've been asking for years to my classes, who's this guy? And nobody has identified him. I don't know what that says about this country, but he is the richest Canadian. His name is David Thompson. You can call him Lord Thompson if you meet him. He's the third Baron of Fleet, and he's the chairman of the company called Thomson Reuters. And you can see his net worth here, which is quite substantial. He's this rich, you may suspect, because it says third Baron of Fleet. And the story is that his grandfather, whose name was Roy Thomson, acquired a lot of British newspapers, and it was the custom at the time to give influential owners of large newspapers a seat in the British House of Lords. And it was a hereditary appointment, so his son, Ken Thompson, was the second Baron of Fleet, and now David Thompson is the third. Okay, so what about wealth? Why do we care about wealth? Well, let's first just think about what it is. Wealth differs from income because wealth is just the value of the assets minus any debts that somebody has. So if we think about where an individual's wealth comes from, it's going to depend, if we look at any particular person, it'll certainly depend on their age. So young people, unlikely to have any wealth, perhaps just debts. But wealth comes presumably from saving during your working life. Some of that is forced saving in the sense that, say, you have to contribute to the Canada Pension Plan, and so you're going to get paid back once you've retired. But people have their own private savings and sometimes savings in company pension plans and things like that. So that counts as saving during working life, and people might dissave or dip into their savings at various times. Maybe if they become unemployed during their working life or when they retire. Well, differences in wealth come not only from age and the time that you've had to save, but of course it depends on differences in wages and salaries. So the very high income people that we looked at a few minutes ago are obviously going to be able to save quite a lot, and they will have quite high savings rates. In other words, the amount of savings that they make in proportion to their income is going to be quite high. People who earn very little money may not even be able to save at all, which is why those public pension plans exist. And of course, the example of David Thompson reminds us of the importance of inheritances. I'll say a little bit about those in a few minutes. Well, in Canada, we don't have very good information about wealth. Statistics Canada does surveys of household finances, but the people with very high amounts of wealth are not going to be counted in these surveys. Well, the survey results look something like this, and what I've done is I've put them in the same picture with the distributions of income, just so that we can compare the extent of inequality in the distribution of income and wealth. And not too surprisingly, the distribution of wealth is much more unequal. That's shown by this solid line here. These are the most recent estimates we have for about 2016. If we just look at what the numbers say, the bottom 20% of the population has negative wealth. That means their financial assets are more than counterbalanced by their debts. And even the next 20% only has 2% of total wealth. It's only when you get up to the very top, the top 20% has 2/3 of total wealth. So that's going to be a mix of people, of course. There'll be older people who've had relatively high salaries. There'll be people who've inherited large amounts of money as well. So if we just compare the Gini coefficients, you can see that there's a huge difference between the income distribution, particularly once we've taken taxes and transfers into account, and the distribution of wealth. Well, let's think a little bit about wealth inequality. As I said, we don't really have good data in Canada. There haven't been regular surveys. They've been kind of done at irregular intervals. And a serious problem is that the very wealthy are simply not counted in these surveys. So actual wealth inequality is probably going to be considerably greater for a variety of reasons. Why do we care about wealth? Well, if unlike income, which can vanish from one year to the next, you could lose your job or whatever, having a lot of wealth provides economic security, although perhaps not quite so much when stock markets are crashing like they are these days. Wealth also provides social status and political power. If you want to call up the premier and you're extremely wealthy, he's very likely to take your call. If one of us tries to call him up, I don't think we will get through. It also means political power, and that political power can take various forms. One form it can take is influence over the law, in particular over the tax system. So just to give you a very brief bit of history, in the mid-1960s, there was a famous Royal Commission that had a look at the tax system, and it recommended taxing capital gains. So, for example, if you buy a stock in some company and its value goes up and you sell that, that's a capital gain. If you own some asset, could be land, could be buildings, whatever, if you sell that and you make money, up until 1972, that part of income was simply not taxed. So somebody who earned $10,000 in wage income paid taxes. Somebody who earned $10,000 through stock speculation paid nothing. So this Royal Commission recommended that a dollar be taxed equally no matter how somebody received it. Well, in 1972, a very limited form of taxation of capital gains was introduced. But at the same time, taxes on estates and inheritances were abolished. And a former teacher of mine did a calculation of how much that was worth to Canada's richest families. And once I've adjusted it for inflation, it was basically a handout of about $70 billion or more to the richest families in the country. They benefited very much from the abolition of estate and inheritance taxes. And of course, we have no taxes on wealth. Recently in American politics, some politicians have been promoting the idea of a wealth tax, but that has never existed here. And the idea of taxing inheritances has simply not been on the Canadian political agenda.